Dean Martin found the letter by accident. He wasn't supposed to be home. He wasn't supposed to be looking through Deanna's desk drawer. He was supposed to be in Las Vegas, performing his regular Tuesday night show at the Sands. But a sudden snowstorm had grounded his flight, and now he stood in his daughter's bedroom, holding a piece of paper that would change everything he thought he knew about his 16-year-old girl. The letter was from a doctor, a psychiatrist, and it began with 5 words that made Dean's blood run cold. "Thank you for bringing Dina in." Dean Martin prided himself on knowing his children. He was the cool dad, the one who didn't pry, who let his kids figure things out on their own. He trusted them. He trusted Deanna especially. She was his little princess, the bright, confident teenager who seemed to have inherited his charm and none of his demons. She was popular at school, got good grades, and always had a smile on her face. But as Dean read the letter, dated just 3 days ago, he realized he'd been living with a stranger. Dina continues to struggle with episodes of severe depression and anxiety, the letter continued. Her recent suicide attempt was a cry for help that we cannot ignore. I recommend immediate intensive therapy and close monitoring at home. Suicide attempt. The words hit Dean like a physical blow. His hands started shaking. He read the sentence again, hoping he'd misunderstood. But the words didn't change. His daughter, his bright, beautiful Dina, had tried to kill herself, and he hadn't even known she was sad. Dean sank into Dina's desk chair, still clutching the letter. How long had she been seeing this doctor? How had she gotten there? Who had been taking her? The questions swirled in his mind, but underneath them was a deeper, more painful realization. He had failed as a father. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Deanna was home from school. "Dad?" Her voice called out, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Dean quickly folded the letter and slipped it into his jacket pocket. When Dina appeared in her doorway, she looked exactly as she always did. Pretty, put together, wearing the smile that had apparently been hiding so much pain. "Flight got canceled," Dean said, trying to keep his voice normal. "Thought I'd surprise you." Dina's smile faltered for just a second, and now Dean saw what he'd been missing all along. The slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes didn't quite meet his, the forced brightness in her voice. "That's great, Dad. Want me to make you something to eat?" This was what she always did, Dean realized. She took care of everyone else. She made sure everyone else was comfortable, happy, fed. When had his little girl become the caretaker? When had she started carrying the weight of everyone else's happiness? "Actually," Dean said, standing up, "I thought we could go for a drive. Just you and me. Talk." Something flickered across Dina's face. Fear, relief? Dean couldn't tell. "Sure, Dad. That sounds nice." They drove in silence through the hills of Beverly Hills. Dean kept glancing at his daughter, seeing her with new eyes. She sat perfectly straight, hands folded in her lap, staring out the window. How many times had they sat like this, with him completely oblivious to the storm raging inside her? Finally, Dean pulled over at a lookout point overlooking the city. He turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, trying to find the right words. "Deanna," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She turned to look at him, and for the first time in months, maybe years, Dean saw his daughter's real face. Not the performer, not the people-pleaser, but the scared, hurt girl underneath. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" It was such a simple question. 3 words. But they broke something open in Deanna that had been locked away for too long. Her face crumpled and she started to cry. Not the pretty tears of a teenage girl upset about a boy or a bad grade. These were the deep, wrenching sobs of someone who had been drowning in silence. Dean didn't ask how he knew. He didn't mention the letter. He just reached over and pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her while she fell apart. "I'm sorry," she sobbed into his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Daddy. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want you to worry. You're always so busy, and everyone expects you to be happy all the time. and I didn't want to be another problem. Dean felt his heart breaking. "Baby girl," he whispered, stroking her hair. "You could never be a problem. Never." "But I am," Dina cried. "I am a problem. There's something wrong with me. I can't feel happy anymore. Not really. I smile because I'm supposed to, but inside everything is just empty, and it's getting worse." Dean closed his eyes, remembering all the times he'd done the same thing. All the nights he'd stood on stage, making thousands of people laugh, while his own heart felt like lead. All the mornings he'd woken up and had to force himself to get out of bed, to put on the mask, to be the king of cool when all he wanted was to disappear. "Dina," he said softly, "look at me." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "There is nothing wrong with you," Dean said firmly. "Nothing. Sometimes our brains play tricks on us. Sometimes they make us feel things that aren't true, but that doesn't mean you're broken." "How do you know?" Dina asked, her voice small. Dean was quiet for a long moment. He'd never told anyone about his own struggles. Not his wives, not his closest friends, not even Frank. The darkness that sometimes consumed him was his secret shame, the thing that made him feel like a fraud every time someone called him cool or confident. But looking at his daughter's tear-stained face, he knew that some secrets were more dangerous than others. "Because," Dean said slowly, "I've felt exactly the same way." Dina's eyes widened. "You have?" Dean nodded. "For years, sweetheart. Sometimes I wake up and it feels like there's a weight on my chest so heavy I can't breathe. Sometimes I stand on stage in front of thousands of people and feel completely alone. Sometimes I smile so much my face hurts, but inside I'm screaming." "But you're Dean Martin," Dina said, confusion in her voice. You're dad. You're not supposed to feel like that." Dean almost smiled. "Being Dean Martin is just a job, baby. It's something I do, not something I am. And sometimes doing that job, being that guy who's always cool and always has a joke, sometimes it's the hardest thing in the world." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun begin to set over Los Angeles. Finally, Deanna spoke. "The doctor says I need medicine and therapy. He says it might take a while to feel better." "Then that's what we'll do," Dean said without hesitation. "But what about school? What about my friends? What will people think?" Dean turned to face her fully. "Dina, listen to me very carefully. I don't care what anyone thinks. Not your friends, not the neighbors, not the press if they find out. The only thing I care about is you getting better. The only thing that matters is you." "But your image? Screw my image," Dean said, and the vehemence in his voice surprised even him. "You think I care more about some stupid image than I do about my daughter's life?" Dina stared at him. She'd never heard her father speak with such raw emotion. "I'm going to cancel the Vegas shows," Dean continued. "I'm going to cancel everything for the next few months. We're going to figure this out together." "Dad, you can't do that. You'll lose so much money." "Money doesn't matter," Dean interrupted. "Nothing matters except you getting well, and I'm going to be here for every step of it. No more traveling, no more leaving you alone. I should have been paying attention. I should have seen." Now it was Dean's turn to struggle with emotion. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me." "You didn't know," Dina said softly. "I got really good at hiding it." "Too good," Dean said. "Just like your old man." Over the next few weeks, Dean's life changed completely. He called his agent and canceled every commitment for the next 6 months. The industry was shocked. Dean Martin didn't cancel shows. Dean Martin was the most reliable performer in Vegas. But Dean Martin also didn't care. He drove Dina to her therapy appointments twice a week. He learned about depression, about anxiety, about the way mental illness could hide behind a pretty smile. He sat in family therapy sessions where he had to confront his own demons, his own tendency to bury feelings under jokes and alcohol. The hardest session came 3 weeks in, when the therapist asked Deanna to tell her father exactly what had driven her to attempt suicide. "I felt like I was drowning," Dina said, her voice barely a whisper. But everyone thought I was swimming. I was so tired of pretending to be okay. And I looked at Dad, always performing, always on, and I thought maybe that's just what our family does. We perform happiness even when we're dying inside. Dean felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Baby, is that what you think I want from you? Performance? Dina shrugged. Isn't it what everyone wants? You've made a whole career out of making people feel good. How could I tell you that I wanted to die? That night, after they got home from therapy, Dean did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He canceled his evening plans and sat down at his piano, not to practice for a show, but just to play. Deanna found him there an hour later, playing a slow, melancholy melody she'd never heard before. "What's that song?" she asked, sitting down beside him on the bench. "I don't know," Dean said. "I'm making it up. It's how I feel." "It's beautiful," Dina said, "and really sad." "Sometimes beautiful and sad go together," Dean said, continuing to play. "I think I've been afraid of the sad parts for so long that I forgot they could be beautiful too." As the weeks turned into months, both Dean and Dina began to heal. They learned to talk about the dark days, the ones where getting out of bed felt impossible. They learned to recognize the warning signs, the moments when the mask was slipping. Dean started writing songs again, real songs about real feelings, not just crowd pleasers. Some of them were sad, some of them were angry, some of them were about the weight of pretending to be someone you're not. Deanna started writing too. Poetry at first, then short stories. She wrote about the girl who smiled at everyone while screaming inside. She wrote about the father who made the world laugh while crying in private. 6 months after Dean found the letter, he finally returned to the stage. But something was different. He was still smooth, still charming, still the Dean Martin people loved. But there was a depth to his performance now, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. During his opening number, he dedicated a song to the strongest person I know, my daughter Deanna, who taught me that it's okay to not be okay. The audience didn't know what he meant, but they felt the emotion in his voice. They sensed something real behind the performance. After the show, a young man approached Dean backstage. He was barely 18, with nervous hands and eyes that looked too old for his face. "Mr. Martin," the young man said, "I just wanted to thank you for what you said about it being okay to not be okay. I've been struggling, and hearing you say that, knowing that someone like you understands, it meant everything." Dean looked at this kid, saw himself, saw Dina, saw all the people who suffered in silence because they thought they had to be perfect. "What's your name, son?" Dean asked. "Tommy, sir." Dean pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. "Tommy, I want you to call this number. It's a doctor who helps people like us. People who sometimes feel like they're drowning while everyone thinks they're swimming." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "You really think he can help?" "I know he can," Dean said, "because he helped my daughter, and he's helping me." That night became a turning point. Word spread quietly through Hollywood about Dean Martin's new openness about mental health. Not through the press, but through whispered conversations, through people helping people. Dean started carrying those business cards everywhere. He gave them to a struggling comedian at the Copacabana. He slipped one to a young actress who was falling apart on a movie set. He handed one to a casino dealer in Vegas who looked like he was at the end of his rope. He never made a big announcement. He never held a press conference. Dean Martin wasn't built for grand gestures, but in his quiet way, he began saving lives. Years later, when Deanna was healthy and happy and pursuing her own career in music, she asked her father why he'd never publicly talked about their experience. "Some things are too important for publicity," Dean said. "What we went through, what we learned, that's not entertainment. That's life and death." "But think how many people you could help if you talked about it openly," Dina said. Dean considered this. "Maybe, but I've learned that sometimes the most important help happens in the quiet moments, the private conversations, the hand on a shoulder when no one's watching. He was right. Over the years, Dean quietly helped dozens of people find the mental health care they needed. Comedians who were crying inside, singers who couldn't find their voice, actors who were acting their way through life without ever feeling genuine emotion. He never sought credit. He never wanted recognition. He just remembered what it felt like to watch his daughter fall apart, and he made sure no other parent had to watch their child suffer in silence. The letter that had started it all, the one Dean had found by accident, was framed in his study, not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder of what real love looked like. Real love meant seeing past the performance. Real love meant asking the hard questions. Real love meant being willing to be vulnerable yourself. On quiet evenings, Dean would sometimes play that melancholy song he'd improvised at the piano, the one that was both beautiful and sad. Deanna would often join him, and they would sit together in comfortable silence. Two people who had learned that it was okay to not be okay. And sometimes, when the music ended, Dean would look at his daughter and see not the performer, not the people-pleaser, but the real girl underneath. The girl who was brave enough to ask for help. The girl who had taught her father that the strongest thing you can do is admit you're not strong enough to do it alone. The story never made the headlines. It never became part of the Dean Martin legend. But for the people who lived it, for the father and daughter who found their way back to each other through honesty and love, it was the most important story ever told. Because sometimes the most beautiful songs are the ones only family gets to hear. Sometimes the most important performances happen off stage, and sometimes the coolest thing you can do is let someone see you cry. Dean Martin remained the king of cool until the day he died. But to his daughter, and to the dozens of people he quietly helped along the way, he was something even better. He was real. And in a world full of performance, real was the rarest gift of all.